Welcome, everyone. My name is Joelle, and I'm really excited to host you for Communications Foundations for Startups. The hope for today is to help people like yourselves who are potentially at the beginning of your business to create structures around communications that are both accessible and realistic for your stage of the business right now, but will also be a good foundation for you to build on moving forward. And so today we're not aiming at perfection. We're not looking at an ideal communications plan for a fully functioning, successful, big business. We're looking at a healthy baseline. So welcome, everybody. We'll go a little bit over what we'll be discussing today. We'll do a bit of a welcome and an intro, and a zoomed out overview of what is communications and what are the principles behind communications, and then go through some recommendations, many of which you can apply right away. So some of them I will encourage you to apply them today, and some of them in the next few weeks. It's realistic for you to start implementing them no matter what the stage of your business. So welcome. While I am introducing Vilgrow Africa and myself, I would love it if each of you who are attending could just put in the chat who you are and your business, or why you're here and what you're hoping to get out of it. And yeah, if there's any information about your business that you'd like to share, it would be great to hear that as well. So who is Vilgrow Africa? For those of you who are not familiar, Vilgrow is an impact investor and incubator specifically focused on emerging businesses in the health and life sciences in Africa. And so we have an incubation program where we support businesses doing all kinds of things, from creating new hardware devices in the health sector to innovative food security products, all kinds of different health and life sciences businesses. And so I'm the communications lead at Vilgrow, and have been working with them for a couple of years. My name is Joelle Mumley. I am based here in Nairobi, Kenya. And I also work with other businesses to support them with writing and communications. And in my work with Vilgrow, I have had the chance to see not only what makes communications for Vilgrow work, but also the basics of communications that really be applied on the startup level for people who are much earlier on in their business journey, who maybe don't have the capacity to spend a ton of time on communications. I know that communications is not necessarily your core business. You are creating a medical hardware device. You are providing a new product or service. And so what the focus is on developing your product or service, but communications can sometimes be put on the back burner, which I completely understand, but it is essential, which we'll talk about. And so today is about kind of talking about those easy steps that you can take to create a foundation for yourself. So we have Charlene here, and she is the communications associate for MedSource Group. Welcome. So far, that is the only person who has participated in the chat. But if you can add throughout the conversation who you are and why you're here, that would be fantastic. But welcome, Charlene, and everyone else. So let's start with the basics. What is business communications? The best definition that I found is business communications is any communication that is tied to a particular business objective or goal. So this can be both internal or external, but today we're going to be specifically talking about external communications, partially because as a startup, you probably don't have a huge team. And so internal communications are really most important when your team is growing and you need to, coordinate more communications in a more official way to keep everyone on the same page and things like that. But today we're going to talk specifically about external communications. And so it is particularly, it relates to marketing, but it is really anything that you are communicating out with the world, in the world, that is tied to an objective or a goal. So why is communications important for your startup? Well, I'll start with a little spoiler. We are in the middle of recording our next season of our podcast, Investments for Impact. And we recorded the first episode of the new season last week. And the new season is focused specifically on fundraising for startups. So investment from, family and friends and contributions up to venture capital. And the first episode, our host, Moses Waweru, asked our CEO, Wilfred Njagi, what are the main obstacles that face African startups? And what Wilfred said stuck out to me because, first of all, I'm a communications person and I care about that a lot. But also I thought of this webinar specifically because what he said was most of the founders that he works with have those hard skills. They're there. They are creating an excellent product or service, but it's the soft skills that are sometimes lacking. And soft skills are an essential part of any business. Now, don't get me wrong, technical skills are also very important, potentially more important. No matter how good your communications are, if you have a bad product or service, it's not going to work. So I'm not minimizing technical skills whatsoever, but without soft skills and being able to effectively tell your story, it is still possible that even if you have a good product or service, your venture won't succeed. In order for anyone to buy anything from you, whether that's a product or paying for a service or investing in your business, they have to, first of all, know that you exist. They have to know you're there, and they have to understand what you are offering and how it relates to their needs. Additionally, and what I would say is the third thing is knowing you exist, understanding what you offer, and then trusting you. And building trust takes time. Building trust is not an overnight activity. Building trust takes multiple touch points. And when I say touch points, I mean any interaction that somebody has with your brand or your business. So thinking of like Carrefour, seeing a billboard is one touch point. Walking past the store itself is a touch point. Hearing your neighbor say, oh, I went shopping at Carrefour is another touch point. And it takes so many of those touch points, positive touch points, positive experiences with your brand, positive interactions for someone to buy from you or invest in you. And so all of those pieces are parts of communications for a business. Okay, and we have Bob as well who joined, and from Opero Nairobi, WASH Business Champion. Great. Yeah. Okay. So if you have any questions along the way, please enter those in the chat. And I will pause periodically to remind myself to check those. But also if anyone has any questions right now and wants to speak it out, feel free to raise a hand and you can unmute and ask any questions. If not, I will continue on. So I'd like to talk about general communications principles to start. Now, these are not like, I don't know if you'll find these in a textbook or anything, but these are what I consider to be really useful communications principles, and they guide a lot of my work as a communications lead. And the first one is consistency. Everyone who works with me hears me talk about this a little too much probably, but consistency is an essential aspect of communications. It is not something that produces results overnight. It is all about slow and steady. So I think that it is much better to be somewhat sparse and consistent rather than, and when I say sparse, I don't mean like once a year. I mean maybe once a month. It's much better to do some sort of communication once a month than doing 3 in January and not hearing from anybody, hearing from your business until April or May. So it's very much about slow and steady. And again, people can get impatient with communications because it does take some time. So this is both an encouragement to you and also encouragement like, oh, don't feel bad if it doesn't work overnight. And also like, you really do have to stick with it for a long time because it's not going to be effective immediately necessarily. The second thing is knowing your audience. And this is by no means exclusive to communications. This is absolutely essential for every aspect of your business. You need to know who your audience is for any sort of product you're developing, any sort of service you're offering. You really need to know who you're reaching out to. And in terms of communications, so you need to know who you're trying to reach, where they spend their time, and that can be both online or in person. So is your audience generally on Instagram? Are they on TikTok? Are they going to be people with their CVs on LinkedIn? All of those things are important, but then also, are there conferences that you need to attend? Are there places where you need to, a community center where you need to show up in person? Is there a hospital that you need to visit? All of these things are knowing your audience so that you can most strategically and effectively have good communications with them. And then always connecting it, again, going back to the definition of what business communications is, connecting that to some sort of an outcome or objective that you're hoping to achieve. So what do you hope they will do as a result of your communications? And this can take the form of having like a call to action, but it can also, your objective of a piece of communications might be, people will know I'm an expert in this topic. So it may not mean action in particular, but it may just mean their knowledge of you as an expert on this has grown. And we'll talk a little bit more about ways to strategically get to know your audience a little bit later as well. And then the third thing is just being very purposeful and strategic about your communications. This goes a little bit back to the consistency principle in that this is quality over quantity. It is much better to post once something of value than post 10 times when it doesn't really relate to an objective in your business or doesn't fully apply or it isn't really that helpful to your audience. Everything you share should have a very conscious purpose. And the reality of that is that takes planning ahead of time. That's not something that you can do consistently on a whim. So we'll also talk about strategies for how to plan your communications as well. So what I see as the 3 primary principles that guide business communications is consistency, really knowing your audience, and being very purposeful and strategic about every piece of communications you put out. Okay, now we're going to get a little bit more into the practical. And these are a few things that I want you to start doing today, like right away. And for some of you, you may be beyond these steps, and that's totally fine. But if you aren't, these are the steps 1, 2, and 3, and 4 that you should focus on. So first of all, a website. I'm not saying right now that you need to build a fancy website, but what you really need to do immediately is purchase your preferred domain name. That's going to make it easier for people to find you online if it's a name that's closest to your business. You don't want to be stuck trying to figure out a unique domain name because all the domain names that you wanted were taken. So day 1, sometimes I get an idea and I buy a domain name because I'm like, you never know, I could capitalize on this and I'll be happy I have the website. Yeah, some of those have not come to pass, but very useful to have that domain name. And then create a very simple landing page. It doesn't have to be something super fancy. But the fact is, if somebody Googles you and there is nothing online, it looks weird. It looks like, oh, maybe they don't exist, or maybe they're not legit. So having some sort of a landing page with even a few sentences to start. And I think there's probably room for a future webinar about more detailed things about how to create a good website. But for today, we're talking about the first steps. So create a very simple landing page and do it on a platform that's really easy to use. There's so many platforms. Some of them like Squarespace and Wix and platforms like that, you actually get by the domain name through whichever platform you're using to actually build a website. But then you can also, what is it? Sasa Host is a good domain name platform, and there are several others. Honestly, you can just Google it. There's lots of resources out there. Secondly, social media. Again, in the same way that you should purchase a domain name, you should register the handles that you want. Even if you don't have a current social media plan, even if you are not ready to think about posting on social media, get the handle that you want just so you have it. And to start, focus on no more than 2 or 3 channels. So whether that's Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, focus on, I say 3 only because I don't want to limit anybody, but I would say 2. Like, just focus on 2, keep it simple, and make sure that you get the handles that you want, even if you're not ready to start. Third is a logo. Again, doesn't have to be anything fancy, and you will most likely rebrand at some point. Whether you make a super fancy logo now or something really simple, you're probably going to rebrand. So keep it simple, but just have something that is attached to your business that people can recognize as related to your business. Even if it's, even if you just get a free Canva account and do something very basic, choose a few colors, design something very simple, and have a logo. The fourth thing is start list building. And this, we could do a whole webinar on how to list build. But basically what list building is getting people's email addresses signed up to some sort of a newsletter, or signed up in a way that they know that they might be receiving information from you. So one thing to be very careful with this is GDPR requirements. You can't just like find someone's email and add them to your list. They need to consent to being added to a list. So there's all kinds of strategies around this, which I won't really get into today. But there's like on your website, if somebody wants to download something, having them required to sign up for your newsletter to download it. You can also do direct outreach and ask if people are interested in joining your mailing list. But it's something to start thinking about early, because there are opportunities for getting emails along the way, even if you don't have a plan for a newsletter or what you're going to do with a mailing list yet. It's really valuable to start thinking about that very early on, so that every opportunity you have to get someone's email and get them to consent to being part of your mailing list, that you're taking advantage of that. Okay, pausing for questions. I'm not seeing any in the chat, but does anybody have any questions? Okay, moving on. So we're now getting into more of the practical stuff. We talked earlier about the importance of planning things out ahead of time in order to be really strategic and purposeful about what you're putting out into the world of your business. And so I would really encourage all of you to start a communications schedule. This can be very simple. If you have any sort of, Vilgro uses ClickUp, but there's lots of different platforms that you're using, but I use a spreadsheet most of the time. So it can be a very, very simple template. And actually, anyone who is registered for this webinar will receive a sample template that you can adapt for your own purposes to create a schedule. I usually have a tab with the specific schedule and then a tab on the spreadsheet with an ideas page where you can spend some time brainstorming, or just when you think of an idea at any point, you can put it in the ideas tab and fit it into a schedule later. So I'm going to show you a screenshot of what we use as Vilgro. Okay, just pretend that the bottom section is to the right of the top section. There just wasn't enough room. But this is March for Vilgro. And so you can see there's the month, there's specific dates, which we didn't really add those in there. And then we had a big event at SandCalp on the 1st of March, and then we've had all of these other communications pieces. First of all, I would like to say that this is a lot of things. We did a lot in March. It's a lot even for Vilgro. So we probably would normally do probably 5, maybe 6 things in a month. This was a busy month. So you may have much less than this. But generally, we have different types of communications pieces, including an event. An event is a communications piece in different forms, and then the specific topics, and then the people responsible. You can see Joelle and Christian, we're the comms team, so a lot of it lands on us. And then the different outlets. So the blog is going to be on the website and shared on social media, for instance. This Communications for Startups webinar, which is happening as we speak, there's going to be a recording on YouTube. So this is actually the next column, which is parallel comms pieces. So for the event, for instance, the event was the major comms piece, but in order to successfully have that event, we had Christian created a bunch of videos. So those are sort of like auxiliary comms pieces that went with it. It's just a way to organize it, to visualize everything, and to really zoom out and see, okay, let's look at the next 3 months and decide everything we want to do. And that is such a key aspect of making sure that everything you put out into the world is connected to an objective of your business, as opposed to just sharing for sharing's sake, which is much less useful. The next strategy that is really useful for a lot of areas of work, but I feel like it's especially applicable in communications, is the idea of batching work. So I don't know, you may have heard of this concept before, but it's basically grouping similar tasks rather than switching between the types of activities, which, let me give you an example so that actually makes sense. For example, let's say you decide you want to post on social media twice a week. Instead of on Monday of that week saying, okay, I'm going to create an entire social media post. I'm going to come up with an idea. I'm going to choose the photo. I'm going to write the caption, and then I'm going to post it. Instead of doing that, you should brainstorm the topics for the entire month. So instead of starting with one post and doing every step in the creation process, do the first step of the creation process for all of the posts for the next 1, 2, 3 months. So brainstorm topics. So if we're doing 2 social media posts a week, let's say we're planning for a month. Brainstorm topics. The next step, whether you do it directly after the brainstorm or you take a break, you do it the next day, you finalize the topics. You come up with 8 social media post topics all at once. Then you look for or create images for all 8 of those. And then you write captions for all 8 of those. So that's the idea of batching work. Basically, apparently, I don't know how true this is, but our brains are just more efficient when we're doing the same tasks over and over again, instead of switching between types of tasks. I hope that makes sense. But the thing is, even if that's not true of your brain, I think it probably is. I find it much easier to conceptualize. So it's much easier for me to just think about all I need to do is brainstorm topics. I don't have to think about the fancy end product yet. I can just brainstorm. And then once you can brainstorm, you can deal with, I have something, so I can slightly improve it or focus it. So yeah, I find batching work is really efficient. And when you are in the middle of creating something brand new for your business in terms of a product or service, you want to be as efficient as possible with your time when it comes to communications. So this, instead of a social media post stressing you out twice a week, you have done this at the beginning of the month, and then you don't have to think about it anymore. Does anybody have any questions about batching work? Okay, great. The next strategy is my favorite. It's repurposing content. So this is reusing the same content in different forms. This is not like a shortcut because it's easy, although it is easier than creating something from scratch. It's actually very strategic and really important in your business. If you are, for instance, writing a report for a donor, let's say you have some grant funding from a donor, and you are writing a report on the impact that your startup is making. While you're writing that report, every once in a while, copy and paste a story or a quote or a sentence or an idea into an ideas page and put it in a social media post. Have it be the inspiration for the start of a blog. Don't try and recreate something new every single time you're creating a piece of content. Not only because that's work that you don't need to do, but also no one else is going to see this grant report. And there's all kinds of gold mines in this report that you're writing. Use those gold mines in different ways so that more people have access to them. So you saw our March schedule for Vilgro's March communication schedule. And I talked about the event at SandCalp. We launched our impact report. A lot of work went into this event. We had a panel of amazing panelists talking about really interesting things. And it was a success. It went really well. It was a great conversation. And then we got a video recording of the event. And so that is now up on our YouTube channel. And not only that, but we're going to take that video and maybe create shorter videos that we share on social media of clips of the event, so that somebody who doesn't want to sit down and watch an entire 45-minute panel session on YouTube will at least get some snippets of it. And then what is our blog about this month? It is a summary of that discussion. It's much shorter than the 45 minutes. It's also not, it's reformatted so that it's idea-based rather than who is speaking. So it's not a transcript of what happened in the panel. It's a summary of the ideas that were discussed during that panel. So this is all the same content. It's just repurposed in different ways. So it saves you time and energy, but it also allows multiple people and multiple audiences to access your content in a way that is palatable to them. One person might want to watch the video, another person was at the event, and another person wants to read the highlights in a blog form. So I love repurposing. I think it's really useful, and it requires you to be creative in a different way. Looking at a boring report that you think like, oh, this is so dry, and realizing there's some really good stories in here. And I think if we describe it in a more creative way, it could really convince people that our product or service is making a difference, because that's what it is. And our last strategy that we're going to talk about is going back to, where you are potentially as a startup at this stage in your business. Keep things simple and work with what you have. Things don't have to be overcomplicated. You don't have to be fancy. I'm not saying be casual or sloppy, but you don't have to overcomplicate things. You can communicate in a simple and effective way. send what you have to a friend. If you need a quality check, if you're like, I'm not sure this makes sense, access your networks and just say, hey, I was about to share this on social media, or I was about to share this blog. I would love your feedback on this if you have a few minutes. So you don't have to have a professional writer on your team. You can just ask someone, does this make sense? And is there anything confusing about it? Articles, if you're going to write an article or a blog, they don't have to be long. In fact, people don't like long things. They want things to be shorter. Videos you can create on your phone. And part of what we're going to be sending those who are have registered for this webinar is a list of tips on how you can shoot a video on your phone as well as edit it after the fact. It may not be the fanciest video ever, but it can be really, really effective, honestly. You can still get your message out. And I think I relate to perfectionists very strongly. And I think that a lot of founders are very, in their dedication to their product or service, it can be hard to share things that they feel like are not perfect. And I understand that completely, but we have to take imperfect action sometimes. Again, I'm not encouraging sloppiness. I'm not encouraging just putting things out. Like I said, we want to be very, very purposeful about everything we communicate. But if you wait until it's perfect, you will wait forever. It will never be quite good enough if you have the personality that many people have of, this protectiveness over your product or service, which is a good thing, but we have to move forward with imperfect action sometimes, especially at the beginning. So keep things simple, work with what you have. There are so many resources online. Don't overcomplicate it. If you find yourself not sharing communications because you get stuck, it probably means that you are waiting for it to be perfect. So maybe share it with a friend to start and get their feedback. But you don't need to make it too complicated. Okay, so we've gone over 4 tools and strategies. We've looked at creating a schedule. We've looked at batching work, repurposing content, and then keeping things simple. Are there any questions on that section or any of the previous sections? Okay. Vilgro team, if I'm missing any hands going up, let me know, but I'm not seeing anything. Okay, so those are the main principles and concepts I wanted to talk through. But to close things out, I want to give a few recommendations. So this is what I would.
You have a question?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
In the chat.
Oh, I see it here.
Yeah,
there are differences in communication for product versus services. So here's what I would say. It's not the simplest answer. There is a difference in communications for every business. It's going to look slightly different because every product is unique in some ways and every service is unique. And so as we talk even about a baseline communications plan, it's really going to be particular to your business. Maybe if you have a business that is really heavy on training people, then you may need to have a lot of video in order to give snippets of what a training might look like. Or if it's something that is very, if you're selling to a professor or a university, you may need to have academic papers or academic level papers as part of your communications. It really depends on what your product or service is and who your audience is. So I wouldn't say there's necessarily a difference in communications for products versus services, but that there is a difference between every product and every service, depending on what that is and who your audience is. So it's really about matching your message with your audience. So I hope that that makes sense and answers your question. Great. So when I was thinking about a recommendation for a baseline communications plan, I was really thinking about the companies that are currently in Vilgro's incubation program. And so they're at different stages. The different companies in the program are at different stages for sure. But what I would want to see them do are these basic things. 1 or 2 social media posts each week on a maximum of 2 platforms. I know I said 2 to 3 earlier. You can tell my actual bias is for simpler. And the reason why I want to keep it simple with the number of platforms is that every platform has slightly different algorithms and styles. And the more you divide between the different platforms, the more capacity you need to have to recreate your posts and cater them to each one. And chances are your audiences aren't on every single platform. That's not necessarily always true, but you really need to focus in on who your real target market is. And and also different products, like a lot of medical device products. I don't know if there is much on Instagram. It might be more Twitter or LinkedIn. So just being very strategic, because we're thinking about limited capacity here on your team. And then 1 blog or article each month. Again, these don't need to be long. They don't need to be complicated. If you have a website that has a blog function, which if you've created a website, there will be a blog function on there. That's usually, many of them are, the ones I have used are very simple to use. You can publish them on there and then share them on social media. But even if you don't have anything more than a landing page, you can publish articles on LinkedIn through your profile, either your business profile or your personal profile on LinkedIn. It might actually have to be your personal profile, but there are ways to share articles online without any sort of, there's no barrier. You can share them on many different platforms. The main reason I like the website is because if you publish a blog today on your website, you can continue referring to that for years. Like that's sort of your repository of all of your information. And so anything, actually any comms piece you put out, if it's in written or video form, should somehow be accessible on your website. That's sort of where everything can be found. And so I like the idea of having a blog on a website because you can always keep referring back to that. Repurposing doesn't even always mean adapting to a new format. Repurposing can be, oh, that blog we wrote a year ago is actually really valid again now. Let's share it again on social media. But also the LinkedIn option is great. Really, there's no excuse not to share information because there's no barrier. You don't have to get published in a magazine or a newspaper. You can share widely. And so I would recommend 1 blog or article each month. And so when you think about the schedule and think about blogs specifically, brainstorm topics that are of interest to you and are applicable to your business. What are the things that you're noticing during your work process that you think that's really interesting? I would like to explore that further. Note those things, write them down, and put them down as blog ideas moving forward. I'm using blog and article I'm using them as if they're the same, and they kind of are. A blog is basically like an article on your website. So that's why I'm using them interchangeably. And then the third thing is a monthly newsletter. If you can do these 3 things, that is a great foundation for a communications plan. The newsletter I love because it capitalizes on the list building. And so if you don't have a list, it's not as useful, but you can share a newsletter on social media as well. So that's still a possibility, even if you don't have an email. But what a newsletter does is it can compile what you've already shared. It's the ultimate repurposing tool, is what it is. You can compile what you've already shared throughout the month as sort of a summary of this is what we've done this month. And then maybe feature a few activities going on, some progress in the development of your product or service, maybe a note from the CEO or one of the founders, a highlight of an employee, things like that. And then because you've built your list from the beginning, from day one, you have a group of people who are a captive audience. That's the beauty of a newsletter, because they have signed up for this and they can always unsign up. There is a word for that, but unsubscribe, that's what I'm looking for. And so you know that if they are still receiving your emails, they are at least somewhat engaged. Now, not everybody opens their emails. Sometimes it goes to spam. There's all kinds of things like that, but newsletters have been shown, email newsletters have been shown to be a very effective way to reach a captive audience. So this is my snapshot for what I think a startup could realistically have at any point in their business, especially if there's planning ahead of time. And there are two main activities that as we sort of finish up, there are two main activities that I would recommend for you and your team to do as you prepare to implement a communications plan like this. The first is creating the communication schedule. We've talked about that a lot, but I want to say a few more things. Think of creating the communication schedule in the batching sense. So or it's actually the same as the process of writing an essay or an article. Brainstorm first, no bad ideas, put everything down, organize your brainstormed thoughts, and then put them into a schedule. And one thing I also would like to emphasize about the communication schedule is the internal and external events column that you might have seen. I can't remember how much I emphasized that the last time when we were on that slide, but it's important for you, like if you are working for a business that deals with blood donation, like Damasasa, you want to know all of the world holidays related to that topic and put those in your communication schedule so that you make sure you're sharing around those themes as those holidays come up. As well as conferences that are happening that might relate to what you're doing, as well as internal things like if you know a report to a donor is due, then you can know that you'll have a few impact stories the following month because you'll be gathering data from your impact. So one very important aspect of the communication schedule is sort of putting what you're writing about or sharing about in the context of your business as a whole and the world as a whole. What is happening in the world that you can share in line with that theme. And like I said, I will be sharing a template of that communication schedule that we use, so you can create a version for yourself. And then the other activity is audience personas. So this is also not a specific comms thing. This is just it relates to marketing, it relates to product development, and it's really all about knowing your audience, like we talked about earlier. And an audience persona activity is basically where you think of your different audiences, because most likely you have more than one. So let's say you're a healthcare organization that is targeting both patients and health workers, and you're looking for investment. So you have those three audiences that you're looking at. You want an audience persona activity, you create an individual that is your ideal customer in that audience group. So your ideal patient, and it gets into detail, like 25 years old, female, living in an urban setting, And it helps you sort of understand the personality of your ideal customer, and therefore how you can target them. And so then you could do that for the patient side, the health worker side, as well as the potential investor side. Who is your ideal investor? What are they like? What are they interested in? And we're not going to walk through that today. But if you Google audience persona activity, I was going to share some links, but there's so many that you can find them really easily. It's a really, really useful activity to do with your team, even beyond communications. So I would definitely recommend doing that activity. Any final questions? You can either raise your hand or just type it in the chat. Okay, feel free to add those questions, but just as a quick summary of what we've gone over, the main principles around communications are consistency, knowing your audience, and being really purposeful and strategic about what you put out into the world. Today, buy your domain name, register your social media, create a simple logo, and start your list building. A great question, Linda. I'll answer that after the summary. Use a schedule. It's really useful. Batch your work to be more efficient with your time. Repurpose, my favorite. And remember to keep things simple. You don't have to overcomplicate them. Linda asked a great question. How do you evaluate how effective your communication efforts have been? This is a hard one. But one thing, there are metrics that you can use for sure. You can look at number of followers on social media. You can look at number of visitors on the website. And those things are definitely valuable and useful. But I would say the ultimate success is that when people hear about your business, they say, oh yeah, I know what you do. Familiarity with your business is really the ultimate communications goal. And like I said at the beginning, it is slow and steady. And you'll have peaks from time to time, but it's the long game. And it's almost one of those things where you look back and you'll be like, oh, our communications were successful. But I can promise you that if you are consistent and clear and purposeful, and that if you know your audience, the communications will be effective. Now, you also have to have a good product or service. But if you have a good product or service and you're consistent and effective in your communications, consistent and clear and purposeful in your communications, chances are you will be successful and be a recognized name. By another thing, not everybody has to know your name, know every detail of your business. What you want is for your audience. It's better for the right people to know than for everybody to know, or okay, everybody would include the right people, but lots of people are worse than 100 random people is worse than 10 of the right people to know who your business is and really understand what you're offering. Jesse is asking, which is better, organic growth or paid growth when starting out, especially on social media? This is maybe just my personal opinion. I am an organic growth person. I think paid growth can maybe give you a little peak, and it may be effective in terms of bringing attention, but it is short term and can be not worth it for that reason. When I see more followers for Vilgrow, I'm happy when they're the right followers. It's kind of going back to, I'm happy when it's the people who really are interested in our business, who will want to interact with our business on some level, whether they're an innovator whether they could potentially be a mentor to one of our innovators, whether they are potentially going to like partner with us on something. I'm much, much, much more interested in organic growth that will mean a permanent follower rather than paid growth that can sort of spike and then spike down again. But I am by no means an expert in social media. There may be other people who have different opinions than that, but that's just my personal opinion and from my experience. Any other questions? You will be getting an email from us with some resources. And if any questions do come up, feel free to reach out to me, respond to me, and ask any questions you have. I'm happy to answer those. As a summary of what you will receive, there will be a recording of this and a copy of the slides, the content scheduling template that I mentioned. And then Christian has created tips on both shooting a video on your phone and editing those videos after the fact. So if you are interested in exploring that, that's a really useful first resource. We may be doing more training in the future about some of those more technical things like the video editing and maybe some writing, things like that. And then I will share some links. I said there were too many links on audience personas, but I will in the email share a few links of guides for how to go through the audience persona and a few other helpful links as well. So if there are no other questions, we can give you back about 30 minutes of your time. Edwin, anything else?
Nothing else, Joel, but thanks. This has been a really amazing session. Learned a lot as well. Yeah.
Great. Thanks everyone for joining. And we visit Vilgro's website.
Thank you, Joel. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you, Joel. Bye.